Welcome to the Louisiana Historical Association's annual meeting. I am Dr. Henry O. Robertson, President of the Association for this past year, 2020 to 2021. You are joining me for my presidential address. Because of the global pandemic, the association did not meet last year. The entire 2020 meeting was Zoom presentations. These panels have been an excellent alternative and I have enjoyed them. For a second year in a row, we are not meeting in person, and we'll have a new set of Zoom presentations all during the months of March and April 2021. The program chair, Shannon Frystack, and the program committee organized many fascinating presentations. Please do not miss a single one. Go to lahistory.org for a schedule and all details. My appreciation is deep as well to the board of directors, our secretary-treasurer, the previous president, and you, the members of the LHA, for all the sacrifices that everyone is making to be healthy. My thoughts and prayers are with every family that has suffered a loss, endured pain and sickness, and felt the unbearable silence in these terrible times. My hope is that we can come together in person next year. For me, one of the most cherished memberships of my life has been, for the past 30 years, I have been associated with the LHA. As a life member, my commitment has been to see this organization thrive through all seasons. More than anything, I have looked forward to annual meetings and kicked myself when I miss them. Although my attendance has fallen short many times, each meeting in every city has been a joy. Participants and attendees inspired me, kickstart my work, and most of all, provide an education for teaching, research, and writing. LHA membership is a great way to connect with others who share your interests. Please visit lahistory.org to join today. Over the years, there have been many LHA members who have helped my career as a historian and enriched my professional life. Thank you to Bill Arsenault, the late Tom Carlton, Glenn Conrad, to Charles Vincent, Carl Brasso, Janet Alured, Jeff Anderson, Mike Martin, Charles Pelgrin, Kevin Fontenot, James Wilson, Elaine Thompson, John Rodrigue, Paul Hoffman, Gaines Foster, Jerry Sanson, and all board and committee chairs this past year, and plenty of others. And of course, I cannot mention you all, or this list would be very long. Please forgive me if I have overlooked anyone. Support for this presentation has come from the Hogan Family Board of Regents Professorship and the Walker Endowment of Louisiana College. My thanks go to the leadership of Louisiana College, the archival staff of the Henry Hunting Library of San Marino, California, the Southeastern Architectural Archives and Special Collections of Tulane University, Hill Memorial Library at LSU, the East Baton Rouge Parish Library, Rapides Parish Library, the New Orleans Preservation Resource Center, and the Alexandria Preservation Commission. The work I'm about to share is actually a new project. I'm only about a third into the research and writing. This presentation is actually my first opportunity to share with others and chart a course for future directions. The creation of a Louisiana bungalow court, suburban development in Louisiana, 1909 to 1930. In 1919, just over a century ago, the newly chartered Bolton and Hayden Realty Company of Alexandria, Louisiana, requested a city survey for 17 acres of land recently purchased for development. The parcel located at the edge of town had been known for decades as the J.R. Thornton Plantation. The old plantation, whose family included a prominent state senator and district judge, traced its origins somewhere back into the antebellum past. During the last decades of the 19th century and into the first two of the 20th, change at this place, and in Rapides Parish for that matter, arrived slowly, if at all. From all appearances, the Thornton family operated a farming concern not so different from bygone days. The 1920s map here reveals how that very old pattern of life was giving way to a new suburban development. You see, the old plantation homestead now contained bungalow homes lining either side of its grand avenue. The extent to which Louisiana is a distinct place with its own unique history, and at the same time how the state and its history incorporates Southern regional and American trends, is an important underlying theme of Louisiana's history. For decades now, historians have sounded the depths of these two important influences of continuity and change. The tension between these opposites is found in the first bungalow suburbs of Louisiana, specifically the new urban growth in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Alexandria during the early 20th century exhibited this important fulcrum of history. The teens and 1920s have been labeled a time when a Victorianism gave way to modernism across the South. The progressive vision of that time did not, however, incorporate advances in race relations. Separation and inequality prevailed in ways that preserved an old racism. The creation of 3 bungalow neighborhoods entrenched segregation and inequality. African Americans would be excluded by restrictive covenants written into deeds, the high price of the homes, and blatant appeals to racism in marketing materials that grabbed the attention of white consumers. At the time, the cities of Alexandria, New Orleans, and Baton Rouge continued on upward trajectories of significant population growth. Double-digit growth numbers reflected a growing urban to rural, continuing rural to urban movement of people, decades of railroad building, the emergence of the lumber industry, oil and gas exploration, and finally the stimulant of World War I. The city of Alexandria began inching again outward from the banks of the Red River, where it had been set back in 1805. New Orleans continued a movement outward from the bend in the Mississippi River into the low ground and towards the lake. Baton Rouge inched eastward from the Mississippi River. Louisiana's 20th century suburbs would not be exactly like those of the 19th century. Historian Kenneth T. Jackson, in his landmark work, Crabgrass Frontier, argued that new neighborhoods of this century were built to be within the reach of the middle class. New urban islands connected families to the city's businesses via transportation, such as streetcars and then automobiles. Most households reflected an increasing professionalization of occupations practiced by those who live there. Jackson laid an important foundation for looking at the suburban form of newly built communities across America. My premise follows that the creation of what would be bungalow neighborhoods in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Alexandria illustrate well a palpable tension between the change that these suburbs appeared to be and the continuity found within them. The bungalow. What then is a bungalow and a bungalow neighborhood? The bungalow is a house type whose origin dates back perhaps 300 years to Bengal in India. And then this architecture made its way to Great Britain, and by the late 19th century, the house type entered North America. Its first appearance came as a vacation or retreat home in the mountains or along seashores. According to Anthony D. King, who researched its complex diffusion in the 1984 work, The Bungalow, the Production of a Global Culture, this house type matured to its fullest extent in the United States. A host of factors, he believed, led to its adoption, use, and then American prevalence. The bungalow became one of the most numerous house types ever to appear in the country. Louisiana would not be an exception to what was an important pattern of global diffusion. According to the New Orleans Preservation Resource Center, which oversees the preservation of the largest collection of these homes in the state, the basic bungalow is a raised, pitched roof frame structure, 2 rooms wide and 3 rooms deep. Most have few halls, and in all but a few cases there is some sort of front porch. Some have half porches and some have full porches. To fully understand these new Louisiana bungalow neighborhoods, one must pause for a moment and visit that place of promise among the valleys, canyons, and mesas just east of the blue waters of the Pacific Ocean. from Los Angeles to Louisiana. At the turn of the 20th century, ideas and influences that originated in California began moving eastward and weaving their way into American culture. Whether it was a critical mass of people living out there, or the rise of large cities, or simply the ferment of the progressive era of the early 1900s, the West Coast burst open with extraordinary creativity. The first American bungalow neighborhoods emerged around the booming metropolis of Los Angeles, California. The historian Anthony King pegged the start date there as 1902, when an architect returned from an overseas trip to England, where he came across bungalows. In 1904, a Pasadena architect wrote a long and illustrated article, California Bungalows, Two Plans Which Fulfill the Best Conditions. The piece appeared in the Sunday Los Angeles Times. The author was Myron Hunt, an architect who had worked in the same office as Frank Lloyd Wright back in Chicago. Hunt and Elmer Gray, a partner of his, had started writing a series of pieces on architecture. Hunt emphasized how he incorporated natural light into the bungalow with tall windows, raised room ceilings to 11 feet, adding dormers to the roof line. Hunt even told owners to plant deciduous climbing vines on the porch to add to the beauty. Hunt went on to a long and successful career, in part because he knew what California consumers wanted to buy. The genius of architects such as Hunt, then the hubris of real estate brokers, and the materialistic ambition of homebuyers combined to drive a new and lucrative housing business. Among the best descriptions of what the real estate brokers had in mind are the sales books of the companies themselves. A plan book from the Los Angeles Investment Company preserved at the Huntington Library in San Marino stated how the desire to own or move into a better dwelling evoked the great ambitious American spirit, home owning. The firm claimed to have built 1,400 homes for 7,000 Americans. The company is able to help you because its method of tract development and home selling are designed for the man of moderate means, the sales book explained. Here, the man who earns modest wages may have a home of beauty and comfort, the sales pitch went. Using capital the company accumulated, these businessmen bought up choice acreage of ailing farmers by offering cash for their land. Then, with the help of engineers and an army of workmen, planners set about building residential homes, schools, and the brochure promised, in pentameter prose, a whole village of Shakespearean English-style shops. The biggest selling point being not just romantic nostalgia, but all the conveniences of the age. Electricity, natural gas, telephone, water, sewer, all brought to the house. Access to an inexpensive streetcar line and then the new automobile commuter routes stood high in importance. An engineering firm involved in the development of one of the early Pasadena bungalow neighborhoods emphasized how, in order to make an ideal dwelling, one should not only strive for lines of beauty, the engineer asserted, but should incorporate every modern improvement and convenience possible, as these are the things that attract a buyer. You can go directly to the tracks where you find salesmen to show you around. It will do no harm to drop in and talk the matter over. You will be surprised to know how cheaply and how easily you can secure a bungalow home. The company's direct oversight of the process from start to finish through economies of scale controlled costs. Typically, companies owned their own mills and hired workmen to produce a quality, affordable product. 500 bungalows of 1, 2.5, and 2 stories have been built, the Los Angeles sales book boasted. Rather than cookie-cutter design and geared entirely to mass production, the developers emphasized that industrialism had not deadened their sensibilities to individual choice. No two homes are alike. Each has a different atmosphere, a different tone. The floor plans are in some cases similar, but the exteriors are radically different. A whole page had explained. Each home was prized for its individuality. The architectural treatment of no two homes was alike, and for each home a different floor plan was designed. As a general thing, these homes consist of from 3 to 5 rooms with bath and porches. The price was also right. For as little as $2,800, or on average $3,500, the developer would let a home go to an eager buyer. If one needed to borrow, the company handled the financing themselves. You can move in on payment of only 1/10 cash, sometimes less, from $200 to $450, and then pay in the balance in small monthly installments like rent. At the end of the terms, they were an owner. It was the beginning of a home mortgage loan industry with all its compounded interest and other Einsteinian financial mysteries. Following the profitable planting of what became landmark examples in Pasadena, other architects, financiers, and developers moved into the business across Southern California. Architects such as Myron Hunt and the Green brothers, Charles and Henry, who became notable for their rich clients and dabbled in the more common house designs in a sort of trickle-down architecture. Floor plans appeared in books by the thousands from architects and companies all over the country. From the lumber companies themselves to household names such as Sears and Roebuck and Montgomery Ward, all of them sold house plans for $1 or $2. Those latter two companies sold all of the actual building materials, an entire house ready to ship by rail. A plan book from architects in Shreveport, Louisiana, listed hundreds of modest designs which found their way onto streets across Louisiana. In New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Alexandria, evidence exists that the California bungalow development model landed in the state from the west. Louisiana conformed in this case to an emerging American architectural and urbanization trend. Gentilly Terrace. One of the earliest, if not the first, large-scale bungalow neighborhoods created in the state began in New Orleans. Out and away from the French Quarter, CBD, and St. Charles Avenue, an urban development began towards the lake and east of the Avenue of Elysian Fields. Developers Michael Babcock, Edward E. LaFay, and R.E. Edgar Montezon purchased land on the outskirts of the Crescent City and began planning a large suburban development. The developers chose the soil of a higher ground terrace formation. The site sat along what is now Gentilly Boulevard. Homes on the hills, the banner slogan read. The urban and architectural historian Stephen J. Hoffman has done incredible work to uncover the beginnings of this suburb in his 2016 article in the LHA journal Louisiana History. An exhibition done around this time by Kevin Williams at Tulane University of bungalow plans explained exceptionally well how the homes and community in Gentilly were envisioned as one. The Gentilly Terrace neighborhood contains, as the New Orleans Preservation Research Center has found, the largest collection of California craftsman-style bungalows built 1910 to 1926 in this state, as well as English cottages and Spanish and Mediterranean Revival raised houses from the period 1910 to 1940. In addition, a good percentage of these homes are still at their original location. Perhaps as many as 250 remain, despite flooding during Katrina and the other ravages of time. The New Orleans City Planning Commission defines the boundaries of Gentilly Terrace as Fillmore Avenue to the north, Peoples Avenue to the east, Dahlia Walk and Benefit Street to the south, and Elysian Fields Avenue to the west. The living area encompasses a 1.2 square mile chunk of land. Scholar Stephen Hoffman pointed out that the suburb developed as both a streetcar and automobile suburb. Transportation played a significant role in the development of the bungalow neighborhoods in New Orleans as in California. In 1909, about the same time as the developers planted the first bungalows outside Los Angeles, the Bakke and de Montezon firm in New Orleans printed a substantial promotional book for Gentilly Terrace, complete with the catchy "Come On" slogan, "Here's your opportunity." The plot of higher ground, 5 to 6 feet above sea level along Gentilly Boulevard, fertile soil and other amenities made it ideal as a location only 3 miles from downtown. The sales book contained the look, the feel, and many of the exact same wording and ideas made in California's development company sales books of the same time period. Moving to this suburb out of the stuffy city means pure air, beautiful lawns, health, and the real joy of living. Along with this assertion, there were promises of affordability, the conveniences of the age, and a better life even before the neighborhoods ever came into existence. As Hoffman found, the construction and style of many of the homes in Gentilly Terrace are entirely Californian. The builders rejected the rich architectural heritage of Louisiana's French, Spanish, African, and American traditions. Edgar de Montezan, according to family lore, himself took a trip to California. A search of newspapers and other sources has not turned up thus far any evidence of his visit. It's clear he must have gone right at the start of the innovations out there. Hoffman found the strongest evidence of a connection to the West Coast when he learned that the company had hired foremen only from Los Angeles and moved them to New Orleans. Local foremen would not do it all because they stayed set in their ways and knew nothing of how to build a proper bungalow. West Coast foremen would not suffer from any prejudice of local designs. In this case, the developers made a conscious and dramatic break from the past. In rejecting old architecture and old techniques, the 20th century here promised to be nothing like the past, or so it seemed. One of the most striking pages from the book included a sketch drawing of a large, sprawling pergola, complete with vines, a palm bush, and tall, thin Italian cypress, with the title on the page stating, "Little California." With these words that were a direct comparison to the Golden State, the firm explained, "The climate and soil of our city is practically the same as that of Southern California. Yet here in the Pelican State, visitors noted that there is a lack of beautiful residential districts, which are so common to the Golden West." The designers of Gentilly Terrace laid out a Roman grid of streets for Mediterranean-style homes and gardens, copying what one of the principal owners had seen on a trip to the West Coast. In Pasadena today, there is a wisteria pergola that dates to the 1880s and may have inspired that page. The sales book wanted California lifestyle for its buyers. With this one object in view, the streets and avenues have been laid out on plans very similar to those which have proven successful in Los Angeles. The brochure went on to press the need for a similar architectural design. The bungalow style of architecture, which has proven of such universal success, has been practically adopted as a standard among Gentilly Terrace home builders, the brochure explained. Although the next lines were quick to relieve any fears that they were dictating a style to their prospects. "We don't insist, but we feel that it will prove most desirable," they wrote of the bungalow. Finally, they promised a large central park to be laid out by an expert park designer with an expected completion date the next summer of 1910. No great park appeared, and City Park, off to the west, remained the most important urban park of the Crescent City. The Gentilly Terrace Company printed many of these sales books and upwards of 20,000 copies of a map that appealed to both those who wanted to build their dream home and the savvy investor who demanded a stable return from buying a lot in what was called a home neighborhood. The firm claimed that in the first 2 months of sales, 600 lots traded hands and appreciated by the amount of 100%. The firm accepted 10% of the purchase price down in cash and then $5 per lot per month at only 6% interest until paid in full. A California finance system prevailed here too. A house was seen then, as now, as a big investment, and in Gentilly Terrace, buyers were assured that their home stood on good ground. The elevated terraces between 15 and 60 inches high above street grade were no more than small hillocks. The sales book claimed this amount would make the lots drier and presumably safer from flooding during heavy rains. These claims to being on better ground did bear out somewhat in 2005, when Katrina's surge did not ravage this neighborhood as badly as others. Many homes did suffer significant damage. However, the farther away from the boulevard, the worse off one was. And safety from flood is only a relative term in New Orleans that applies until the next storm. On 2 pages entitled Road to Gentilly, the company stoked Southern Romantic naturalism by painting a bucolic scene, naming the location as one of the most beautiful in the whole South. Semi-tropical views, quaint buildings of the Creole Quarter, historical Bayou St. John, wayside inns, and churches, convents, and monasteries cast their shadow of silent mystery across the path. Hundreds of automobiles travel this road every day, the company promised, and a streetcar line ran up Franklin Avenue and would land passengers at Canal Street in 20 minutes. The company placed racially restrictive clauses into their deeds, which ensured the neighborhood would be unquestionably white and remain white for nearly 3 decades. African American neighborhoods existed and emerged at the edges or not far from Gentilly Terrace. In 1930, Dillard University, a historically black university, moved in just at the southwest edge of the Gentilly Terrace neighborhood. The company had purposely created a segregated neighborhood. This was not custom. This was designed with clear intent. The 3 neighborhoods in this study, the Gentilly Terrace, Roseland Terrace neighborhood in Baton Rouge, and Thornton Court in Alexandria, advertised their racial restrictions openly and marketing materials blatantly. The racism was fed to buyers and stoked the buyers' own racism to sell homes. Typically, the restrictive particulars were racial and included long lists of what were truly white planned communities. The Gentilly developers promised that their actions had been well thought out for the good of all, and the brochure stated, quote, "We have made restrictions that will warrant the permanent protection of every buyer." The sales prospectus sought trust with its words. Rest assured that your neighbors cannot build a high fence, nor can a Chinaman build a laundry shack on the corner next door to your home. The whole page appeared as advertised to demonstrate just how far we protect buyers. Listed on that page for the discerning white consumer, and there among the fence rules, building requirements, minimum cost of a home, $2,500 on any street, or $3,000 on the boulevard, the document included a very offensive heading, the color line. As straightforward in language as the other stipulations, the developer spelled out, each purchaser binds himself and his heirs and assigns to never lease or sell to a Negro or Negroes. These racially restrictive clauses, quite offensive, would not have been unusual for the Jim Crow era. The legal prohibition of African Americans from purchase and living spaces started de facto early in Louisiana's history and then in law. From that 1896 Louisiana case, Plessy versus Ferguson, where separate but equal became legal. The murder of Robert Charles, only a few years before the founding of the Gentilly subdivision in New Orleans, stood as among the worst examples of urban lynching. In this way and in this era, Gentilly Terrace did not strike out on a new future, and in reality remain firmly planted in the injustices of the past. Roseland Terrace. Then we have a second bungalow neighborhood and Baton Rouge's first planned development of the 20th century. Roseland Terrace is an 18 to 20 block section of the city, now a National Historic Landmark, bounded by Government Street to the north, 18th Street to the east, Myrtle making the southern limit, and originally 22nd Street composed the western end. The name derived from the Cherokee roses that grew along a fence at the abandoned horse racetrack that caught the eye of developers. The other streets would be named after southern flowers as well, stoking that southern romantic naturalism of the past. In 1912, this modest spot sat only about 1 mile from the riverbank, yet many residents considered the location a good distance outside of the city. The Zadok Real Estate Company of Baton Rouge invested $50,000 in this land for a bungalow neighborhood. The chief salesman, A.F. Kazusias, later to be dubbed Mr. Baton Rouge, went to work and sold 400 city lots running between $200 and $400. He made Roseland Terrace a huge financial success. His sales pitch in this brochure asked potential buyers if they believed in Baton Rouge. He made the case well, and bungalow homes sprang up along the streets. Here is one photograph from his collection with the trusty automobile right in front of a big bungalow, illustrating how that home and the car went hand in hand for suburban Baton Rouge. His success encouraged others to develop additional suburbs nearby. Similar to California New Orleans, a realty company pioneered this first bungalow neighborhood in Baton Rouge. The Zadok Company, whose office is seen here, relied on brochures, newspaper promotion, and Mr. Kazusias gathered endorsements from the leading businessmen of Baton Rouge. He collected 24 letters of support from the city's prominent men, bankers, theater managers, all the hotels, grocery stores, hardware stores, jewelry stores. The typed letters appear on fancy letterhead and are signed by people who had bought lots, built homes, or encouraged investment in the development. Even Fred Grace, director of the State Land Office, penned a glowing endorsement letter. The land, he attested, was not low-lying. The lots were reasonably priced, he thought, and included all the utilities and a streetcar line within walking distance to the lots, he wrote. His perspective on the land proved essentially correct, as the 2016 flood did not affect this spot as much as others. I cheerfully recommend Roseland Terrace, Grace concluded. A textual analysis of the letters themselves that I made showed the vast majority, 20 of the 26 letters in the collection at the East Baton Rouge Parish Library, chose to emphasize the investment potential first, then the environment and amenities second, with the location and racial restrictions rounding out the most frequently mentioned topics in the letters. The Roseland Terrace suburbs would be a whites-only one, similar in fashion to Gentilly Terrace. Letter after letter in that collection outlines in a sentence or two the desirability for not having African Americans in the neighborhood. One letter expressed how the suburb sat on a high elevation and is being inhabited already by the best citizens, and there is no possibility of it ever being inhabited by colored people. That's a quote. A March 6, 1912 letter from the editor of the Daily State Times newspaper explained, quote, "The fact that none save whites can live in the terrace gives the subdivision a series of advantage none other sections of our town can rival." Other letters are equally shameful and reflect no change in attitudes from the past. By 1923, Baton Rouge witnessed a proliferation of the bungalow neighborhoods, with 21 named suburban developments plotted out in the subsequent 11 years after the Roseland sales had begun. Similar to Los Angeles and New Orleans, these neighborhoods sprawled out, extending urban life. Very much like New Orleans, they created white bungalow communities. Thornton Court. The diffusion of the California bungalow suburbs proceeded along hierarchical lines. Alexandria, up on the Red River, did not register evidence of a bungalow neighborhood until fully 10 years after New Orleans and 7 years following the successful Roseland Terrace sales. In October of 1917, as America had settled into World War I, a short piece on bungalows appeared on page 11 in Alexandria's Daily Town Talk. This newspaper mention of bungalows is the first one to appear in the town's main newspaper, containing a suburban development angle rather than just mention of a house type. Under the heading, Hometown Helps, an unknown author told readers how the bungalow gains in favor. The piece explained how this revolutionary architectural house type was sweeping the nation. The bungalow has individuality of its own and has lost the crudeness that has marked earlier types. 3 years later, the town's population of Alexandria had reached 17,510 people, and by 1930, the number had climbed as total people in this city reached 23,025. The banking family of the Boltons and their partners had learned of the California way of suburban development some way, somehow. The company styled itself as Upbuilders of Alexandria. They had eyed the Thornton Plantation in 1919 as their next crucial piece to fall into place in what must have been a calculated process of creating a suburban community. The Boltons possessed a large vision of a neighborhood anchored by a new all-white high school, Bolton High, and whose grand building was completed in 1926, and a new and also segregated grammar school, Bush Avenue Elementary. As was the case in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, bungalows were planned with city gas, telephone, electricity, and now driveways and garages for cars. This next map shows the end results by the 1950s of the tremendous growth around the elementary school. In the distance at the bottom, you see City Park Boulevard. Along that throughway appeared the larger homes, meant to impress one as a posh gateway to all the park's recreation. In the corner of this map appears Thornton Court. When it started, the city engineer, W.H. Sylvester, produced a plat with the date of October 17, 1919. It provides only the most basic of visual representations. Its simplicity and lack of flashy detail belies the profound change seen here. The new street ran through the middle of the old pecan grove that had been a striking feature of the Thornton Plantation. The incorporation of the pecan trees into the new plan fell right into a mentality of incorporating romantic naturalism and a reminder of the antebellum past, as has been the case at Gentilly Terrace and Roseland. Although not called a terrace similar to the other two places, the neighborhood would still be on good solid ground with a 4-foot drop in elevation from the top of the street to the bottom. As you see too, the street originally did not cut through to another one and thus forms a dead end. Bolton and his real estate partner designed a true bungalow court similar to ones that could be found in California. The first bungalow court, that is a street with no outlet and homes around it, appeared outside Pasadena, California in 1909. The St. Francis Court, which had been well documented and photographed at the time of its creation, marked the start of this American design trend. Architect Sylvius Marston had laid out 11 bungalow homes facing each other, bordering East Colorado Boulevard, which became a last-long settlement of the famed Route 66 and the place to find the Tournament of Roses parade on New Year's Day. An observer writing in a 1914 architectural trade magazine predicted that, quote, "It is probable that the bungalow court will continue to grow in favor for use in connection with outlying districts in all parts of the country." By 2010, the Pasadena City Planning Commission found that 111 bungalow courts were still in existence within the 23-mile square corporate limits. From this origin point, the design moved into the rest of the country. In appearance, then in name, Alexandria's Thornton Court started out as a California bungalow court. Within 3 years, the residents petitioned the city and broke the dead end because they wanted to connect to another street and thus rejected the California-inspired design of the developers. The Bolton and Hayden Realty Company did not publish a sales book, or if they did, it has not been found, and instead took out a full-page advertisement in a 1921 edition of the Alexandria Town Talk newspaper. Similar to the Los Angeles investment sales book and the developers in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, large, bold type trumpeted the construction of the first 10 homes of what was called Thornton Place. The splashy full-page announcement included photographs of the earliest homes which lined all 4 sides of the page. One photograph showed the street with both its pecan trees representing the old and spires of electric poles, the new, clearly visible. The 10 pictured homes proved eclectic in design, with bungalows large and small. The most expensive one, according to the U.S. Census, and owned by the manager of the new automobile service station in 1930, is seen among more modest ones. Buy from them and a home will be built, the advertisement words promised. Dozens of sawmills were still roaring in around Alexandria, including a small finishing mill placed just behind Thornton Court for aid in construction. The company explained how 16 more homes were scheduled for completion and 30 homes remained on target for construction during 1921. The facilities of this company are unexcelled, the owners explained. With nearly $250,000 invested in the business, operating our own lumber yards, equipped with modern woodworking machinery, the business, they proclaimed, would be unstoppable. Working our own crews of masons, carpenters, painters, and paper hangers, we are in a position to offer the prospective homeowner the utmost for his investments. The real estate model found in Los Angeles, New Orleans, and Baton Rouge had found its way into central Louisiana. The Alexandria developer sold homes with lots with racial restrictions, no different than New Orleans or Baton Rouge. In this case, the offensive term used in their covenants stated prohibitions against selling the property to those of African descent. This institutionalized racism would be passed along in each deed sale for over 20 years. Not until the United States Supreme Court ruled in the Shelley versus Kramer case, decided May 3, 1948, would racially restrictive covenants and deeds be ruled illegal. A sampling that I did using the 1930 U.S. Census provides a glimpse of the type people who were allowed to live in all three bungalow neighborhoods. I selected approximately 40 households from the length of Thornton Court in Alexandria, the length of Oleander and Olive Streets in Roseland Terrace, Baton Rouge, and then Gladiolus Street, located in Gentilly Terrace, and also Mirabeau Avenue there, which was a street with bigger homes, also in Gentilly Terrace, New Orleans. Not surprisingly, the inhabitants in all three locations were all white, middle class, engaged in professional jobs. The occupations included management positions at the railroad, cotton brokers, accounting, school, and government jobs. An average home along Thornton Court cost $6,000, and Roseland Terrace came in just slightly higher at $6,900. Gentilly Terrace showed more variety. On the south side of Gentilly Boulevard at Gladiolus, the bungalows attained a value of only $2,600. While north of the boulevard, the larger bungalows came in at almost double the cost, or $5,000 in home value. In addition to less expensive houses, Gladiolus in New Orleans contains 65% renters, meaning the majority of homes there were someone else's investment. Thornton Court and Roseland Terrace contained far less renters. 20% were renters, meaning that 80% were owners, as reported in the 1930 census. Radio ownership was surveyed that year along with home value. No surprise, Mirabeau Avenue, which is in the more wealthy area of Gentilly Terrace, of course, everyone there owned a radio, while less than half, or 45% precisely, owned a radio in the streets examined in Baton Rouge in Roseland Terrace. Exactly 50% on Thornton Court could listen to the radio in their bungalow. Gladiolus Street back in New Orleans showed only 22% of the households contained a radio set. Not all of the middle class had acquired this feature of American life. The nativity question asked in the census revealed how 45% of the residents on Thornton Court had been born out of state. Typically, the head of household had been born in another state and not as an immigrant. Very few of the households were of immigrants or where a woman headed the household. There were a few women who led households in the New Orleans sample. Otherwise, patriarchy prevailed within the bungalow neighborhoods. The Oleander and Olive Streets in Baton Rouge registered 31% of the heads of household born out of state. None of the wealthy in Mirabeau Gentilly Terrace sample had been born outside of Louisiana, and in the mainly rent district of smaller homes on the south side of Gentilly Boulevard, 80% of the people had been born in Louisiana. So Alexandria and Baton Rouge bungalows contained a larger percentage of families with out-of-state ties than those examined in New Orleans. The reasons for this anomaly provide additional research questions for exploration. All three neighborhoods also saw African Americans living at their edges. The Cheney and Taylor Streets, only a block over from Thornton Court, had African American families living there, and the architecture is mainly shotgun houses, still almost 100 years later. Baton Rouge is similar, with African American neighborhoods emerging above Government Street. New Orleans has the established St. Roch neighborhood south of Gentilly Terrace and the Desire neighborhood close by. The relationships and connections between these African American and Bungalow neighborhoods merits additional research and study. Conclusion. The emergence of three Bungalow neighborhoods across Louisiana marked a significant departure in the architectural and urban history of the state. A building and sales model started in Los Angeles made its way into Louisiana by direct contact between those in California and Gentilly Terrace developers in New Orleans. A conscious effort was made to be more like California and unlike Louisiana. By imitation or media information, Roseland Terrace and Thornton Court's developers followed a similar pathway. The new bungalows, both substantial and more modest, emerged with manicured lawns and gardens. Developers of the Bungalow neighborhoods promised modern utilities and short commutes by streetcar and then the automobile. In a sense, this urban change represented a big break with the past and became a visible mark of expanding cities that chose a different suburban footprint. An imagined ideal of family communities took shape and appealed to a growing professional class of people. However, the promise was not one open to all. The continuity of racism remained pervasive, and within the sales literature, it was painfully on display. The sales books, endorsement letters, and advertisements made clear these Bungalow neighborhoods welcomed only white families. By price, and most shamefully by the restrictive covenants and deeds, African Americans were excluded legally from the 20th century ideal of homeownership in Louisiana's latest suburban neighborhoods. The direct racist restrictions would last over 20 years and nearly 30 in the case of New Orleans development. As this project develops, my efforts will explore the connections between those white suburbs and the nearby African American neighborhoods. In all three locations of the state, an old segregation prevailed, and yet the economies rendered both white and black communities in need of each other for jobs, services, and a future. Louisiana has shown a distinct tension between the past and the present. It is this tension which drives history. The transition to Bungalow neighborhoods in the early 20th century proved that once again there could be a distinct fracture with the past, but alas, not a clean break. Louisiana contains vibrant cultures, and change does not happen so easily here. Not even with the passage of time or the adoption of outside practices can differences completely alter its landscape.